Good morning and good afternoon. Thank you for joining our webinar today. We have some great discussion that's going to take place regarding the challenges to fiber to the home deployments. And I'm just going to go ahead and get started with some short introductions, starting with myself. I'm Scott Salzer, Client Director with Biarri Networks. I'll go to Christina Bassett. She's our Vice President of Field Services and Engineering at Biarri Networks. Next up, we have Rob McGee, Senior Vice President of Operations, QUANTA Services, and Phil Clark with Paxio. So just to sort of jump right in, skip those. These are the topics that we're going to cover today, sort of the 5 problems that we see as challenges that every fiber to the home project is going to face. Problem 1 is cost. Problem 2 is right-of-way and permitting. Problem 3 is infrastructure. Problem 4 is rural and remote areas. Problem 5 is take rate. So just to get into the discussion, tackling costs, what can be done collectively with the burden of cost from planning to getting the service connected? This is usually the first challenge that comes up in fiber to the home deployments is how do we handle the budget, right? So maybe Phil, you can jump on this one first and give us your perspective as an ISP.
Yeah, and I think, it's thinking about this, my first fiber to the home projects were back in 2001. And, you think some of the costs back then really were material related. And these days, much more of the cost dynamic is shifted to labor, permitting and actually getting the stuff in the ground. So in a planning perspective, it's picking where you want to build. And we typically do urban infill. So we're much more burdened by the cost of in the existing city. So if you have a free area, you're going to try to find those areas where it's easiest to build, being aerial, and easy cities to work with. So I think, tackling the cost is also planning where you want to build, and you got to pick your markets based on a cost basis if you have that choice.
Thanks, Phil. Rob, what's your perspective on how we tackle budget and high cost with fiber to the home?
So I think first off, it's fiber design. I mean, everybody's gonna approach this with how many foot of fiber am I going to build totally? How many homes am I going to pass with that same quantity of footage? And then what is the cost per foot? Like Phil said, you can manage that to some degree by shifting from underground to aerial, the generally lower cost, but you've got the downside of aerial. The timing is generally not favorable, and you can push revenue out far enough that offsets whatever savings you got. And with make ready and everything else, more often than not, people are finding that just starting out of the gate with an assumption that the infrastructure is going to be all underground is probably a safer way to at least fix the cost. The other quick component is a more honest and transparent discussion in the beginning, because oftentimes the general contractor and the ISP will get together and they'll bid it or RFP or however they agree to move forward with the build. And then the gotchas occur over and over, like, oh, by the way, there's rock, and oh, by the way, I didn't account for that. And restoration is different than what I anticipated. And then it becomes like contentious between the general contractor and the ISP, because the ISP had a business case and all of these gotchas are deteriorating that business case, and you're kind of too far in at that point.
Yeah, I think that's, over the course of the projects I've been involved in, that seems to always be the case. It's really hard to budget for worst case scenario, but things definitely always pop up that are going to cause changes to those long-term budget cycles and getting done what you expect to get done from the beginning. Christina, what are your thoughts on this problem?
So, kind of jumping on what Rob and Phil both said, understanding the overall environment and the architecture is key to try and understand, where those gotcha moments are. One of the things, though, that, what we have to look at is planning And design helps with that, because aside from identifying the actual environment and the architecture, it can help with supply chain and material management. So understanding what you're going to use, where you're going to use, and how you're going to use it, those two, they all fall into place. So whenever you're doing any type of an infrastructure build, it's the how, where, why, and with what. So adding on to what Phil and Rob said, it's taking a look at all of those items, not just how we do it, but what we use in order to do it.
Thank you guys for your perspectives there. We are going to move on to some more solutions here. We sort of discussed, what are those challenges? But if you guys would like, maybe Christina, you can take this one first, and taking a look at some of these solutions. What have you seen that's worked out in regards to tackling budget from the beginning, the engineering phase?
So when we look at the overall, right now, like supply chain and material management, like I just mentioned, kind of taking a look at what the architecture is, understanding how we want to get from point A to point B. Phil mentioned that taking a look at the different areas and identifying where you want to build and how you want to build it is key. So part of planning, and I'm going to kind of focus a little bit on the design aspect of it here, taking a look at the design, part of our role is to provide that, we'll call it a trusted partner point of view, letting people know, the customers know, this is where you want to build, this is what your preferred build methodology and architecture is, and this is where you can find ways to, improve your CapEx, improve your OpEx. So some of those solutions are there, and the other part of it too is scheduling. So a huge part of everything that you have to do with the infrastructure build has to do with scheduling. So you have to plan it, you have to design it, you have to order your materials, you have to line up whoever's going to do this, you have your permitting, make ready engineering, and then you go into your construction mode. And there's always pitfalls in construction. As Rob put it, oh, there's rocks. You have to move things around. So understanding what each piece part of the build is, and making sure that those are quantified and communicated are key.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think a good point there is to understand what your jurisdiction is going to allow in regards to construction methods. Do they allow micro-trenching? Do they even allow directional boring? What does the pole landscape look like in this particular area that you might want to try to utilize? Getting all of those details up front and really understanding what you can and can't do from a jurisdictional and a pole attachment perspective, I think is key to understanding what those pitfalls might be as they sort of pop out of the woodwork as you're moving along through construction. Rob, anything else on this one from you in regards to solutions that have worked out for you guys once those changes start popping up and affecting cost?
So I may be just going into a little more detail on what Christina's already said, but we take our design and go a little deeper than a high level design, not quite, to the point where we're ready for permitting, but we'll take that design and we'll walk it out. And when we walk it out, we're not doing it to make sure that the route is sufficient, more so understand what's the most optimal construction method. We've talked about a couple on here. I mean, you can, direct bury, you can plow, micro trench, bore, aerial. I mean, all those things are available. And what we try to do is take every segment and note the most optimal construction method for that particular segment or distribution area. And then when we build our costs out of that, there's some pretty wide swings. Your bore trench cost may be $20 a foot, but you can direct bury for $4 or $5 a foot, or micro trenching. That's a buzzword everybody wants to kind of put in the category of the best things since sliced bread. And depending on your backfill costs and what the city's expectation are for that micro trenching, it can quickly become more expensive than boring or kind of more conventional methods. So what we try to do is understand the whole, like every distribution area and what is the most optimal construction method, and then note that, because the prices can swing significantly. And then once we get into construction, if somebody's deviating from the recommended construction method, then we can go back and say, hey, why are you doing that? Maybe it's because they had bore rigs available, so they're born where they were going to missile. But those are all things that are going to impact the cost. So somebody's going to bear that cost. Either it's us because we bid it at a price per home pass, for example, or if we're working more closely with a client, maybe that's cost that we could have saved them if we had buckled down and been a little more disciplined on our construction methods.
Thanks, Rob. Phil, from your perspective, I know you've had to be very creative in the Bay Area, one of the most challenging and cost prohibitive markets in the United States. And working with you in the past, like, what are some things that you've done to overcome when these construction costs start to really rise on you?
Yeah, no, I mean, really adding to, I think Christina and Rob, both great points. I always have to smile when someone talks about, boring at $20 a foot. I mean, we have trouble doing aerial for $20 a foot. So yeah, I sometimes like, to be somewhere else. I think a lot of it does sort of on top of what Christina and Rob said, like from a provider's point of view, it is working with the contractor. Like Rob said, you need a contractor who's going to give you some options. And from the planning stage, when you're starting to talk to those municipalities, the contractor has a whole bunch of tools in that toolbox. The earlier you're working with the municipality, understand what tools you can use, right? I mean, I think actually QUANTA and Paxio have done some work where we went to City of Oakland with a great plan to actually get down the street, and construction made sense, but the city wouldn't approve it, right? So understanding in that planning process, and then you talk a little about that OpEx and CapEx, managing sometimes the harder construction or cost of their construction are some of those key legs. And so having that planning and that contractor, everyone aligned with how the provider is going to be delivering services and how does the provider generate revenue through the construction process, that's very key. So it is a great balance, and it really is needing a team of contractors and engineers that can all work together. So as the provider, you're making those choices and understanding what you're trading off, right? A higher build cost, but a key distribution leg goes in so that you can start generating revenue as you start spreading out versus saving some costs to trade those things off.
Great, thank you. And I just wanted to mention one more point on this, especially from the Bay Area perspective, or large metros that tend to be very expensive to build. One thing that should not be looked over is the availability of utilizing other conduits, releasing fibers. There are some other tools out there that don't require such a disruption or such a heavy permitting process or a big burden of cost. Obviously, you're not going to be able to lease all your conduit and your fiber for your network, but being strategic about that, I think, in the front side of the planning, in areas for backhaul or long feeder fibers, that can really benefit that upfront burden of cost.
Yeah, if I could just add one more thing to that, Scott. I think one of the things that we didn't touch on that's listed there in the slide is the skilled workforce, right? So to that end, regardless of whether it's design or whether it's actual deployment, skilled workforce is key in the success. You want to do it once, you want to do it right. And that actually, it does have a financial impact further on down the road relative to the overall, health of the network. So making sure that whether it's internal to your company or if you have a subcontractor, making sure that you have the right people, the right training, the right certifications out there doing what needs to be done is absolutely imperative.
That is also a great point, and something that was told to me early on in my career is that a client once told me that my project is not your training, right? You need to be trained and be able to meet the expectations of the work by the time you get to the project. So it's critical that engineering and construction firms do have those training programs and ISPs with their technicians, right? So that the time spent in the field doing the work is fruitful towards the project, because labor is so expensive these days, and having a trained workforce is key. So let's move on to problem two. It's kind of one of my favorites, right away and permitting. This is a big one we could probably talk about all day long because there's jurisdictional challenges with local agencies, with federal agencies, with environmental reviews, those kinds of things. So, I think what I would like to hear from you guys is what can the industry do better to work with and collaborate with these jurisdictions to make things a little bit easier. I've got some ideas that I'll share, but Rob, let's have you start this one.
So I don't know if I'm going to address what the industry can do, because I don't know that there is a lot. I have a very very specific example of like how we approach this, and we joke about it. We call it the purple smiley face, and it's a random thing. So you find the person that is going to approve or not approve the permit submission that you're going to provide to the permitting entity. If they say they want a purple smiley face on the top right corner of the third page, what we tend to do, because we're all engineers and construction people and we're smarter than everybody, we want to debate where that goes. It doesn't matter. Like that is the answer. You find out who from that municipal entity has the most influence on the speed in which those permits get approved, and you sit with them and find out exactly. I don't care if they want it, if they give you a font that they want specifically, you find out what that font is and you provide it to them exactly the way they asked you to provide it to them. Every time you deviate from that, it doesn't even matter, but you're sending a message to those people that we know better and their opinion is not important. And I promise you, if that one thing is done when you approach a project, find out who it is, what they want, and do it exactly that way every single time, you're greasing the skids better than any box of donuts ever could.
Yeah, great points. And I would definitely agree with that. If you don't give them what they want, then you're not going to get what you want. Phil, again, just back to the Bay Area and the 100 and some different jurisdictions that are present there.
No, I would, yeah. I mean, first and foremost, agree with Rob. I mean, how are we successful? You got to go talk to the people who are trying to who are doing the permits, and as a provider and kind of there is an important piece we typically also help with, besides just making sure engineers get the plans done how they want to see them. How do we reach out to the community? How do we offer, there's other sticking points, or there's other give points, services, community events. How do we engage in the community? Which again, it doesn't make a crappy permit go through, but what it does do is help make sure that your permits get looked at and you can talk to them and have that open door to find out, like Rob said. I mean, it's getting to the person who will tell you where they want the purple smiley face, right? That's also challenging. It doesn't, finding that person and getting to them, making sure you can have that communication does require, how do you engage in the community? And so, yeah, we look a lot about how do we engage in a community, understand the different pain points. And when you're looking at a large area build, there's going to be certain areas that weren't high priority for us. And sometimes you got to change some of your plans to make sure you're hitting high priority points for the community. Because typically those plans, have value and will start making sure things start rolling. And it is a whole process of making sure you get the right format, like Rob said, to the right person, and you're duplicating that process to work all your permits through.
One more quick point on the same topic, though, the volume as well. You can about guarantee you every entity that you're permitting to is overworked and doesn't have a number of people they would really need to properly review them. What we tend to do is believe or convince ourselves the more permits we submit, the higher likelihood we're going to construct out of that. And I think one of the things that companies like ours struggle with, and I know I try to refine this every day, is make sure we're giving them the permits that are constructible and in a volume that you've discussed with them in advance and that they are comfortable with. It's like, because if what inevitably happens is you throw a bunch of permits at them for a whole distribution area, but you really want to build this one route within that distribution area, they don't know that those permits specifically are the higher priority, and they get choked up on the whole pile, and you're kind of in vapor lock. And what their general response is to that is they're going to nitpick and find ways to reject it, because that's the quickest way for them to manage their workload. And we're no longer waiting on them. They've rejected the permit and they're waiting on us. So that's a game that we often don't play well, and should certainly play better.
That's a great point, Rob, and I definitely have experienced that on projects where, you know, the reviewer, just to get it off his plate, will find something wrong to kick it back off to the other side, so that, you know, things aren't being escalated to his manager, that he's not doing his job. So, you know, and again, obviously, a lot of this stuff is relationship building. You know, Christina, how do you feel about you know, permitting, and what can be done in the engineering phase to have a better, at least, understanding of, you know, what jurisdictions are after, and sort of giving them, you know, what.
Yeah. So touching on a couple of things that Phil and Rob both said, the first thing is data, right? Making sure that we have the right data. What's required? Do we understand what the requirements are, what that municipality, that state, whatever that governing body may be, do we have that, and are we portraying it in the fashion that they would like it? More importantly, as we go through and we do that work, making sure that we have that data, one of the, you know, having been throughout the entire course of my career on the front end, the middle, and the back end of the permitting process, it's a relationship. It's not transactional, and there's a certain level of respect that always needs to be used whenever we're dealing with the permitting process. To Rob's point, throwing a box of donuts at them isn't going to get you a permit. But if you're respectful and you're realistic, meaning you're providing your permits in the order in which you want them to be viewed, you're going to get the answers in which you need for them to be reviewed. And more importantly, been on the you know, receiving end of this one, being rude, it doesn't do anything. So part of that, it's a relationship. So just making sure that we have that data, and that we're providing it accurately and to the best of our ability, and providing it in the format and the medium that that particular governing body wants, is key.
Great perspective, and totally agree there. You know, and I think just kind of getting back to the Bay Area and working with so many jurisdictions in sort of one general area, you know, a lot of that initial communication with the jurisdictions, and taking a checklist in there and saying, you know, here's what I need from the city. Like, how do I get your sewer plans? How do I get your water plans? What's your inspection process? What's your average turnaround time? How many permits can you guys actually handle that I'm going to start dumping on you here shortly? You know, and again, it definitely all goes to that relationship building. And I think when you go in with a good plan to the city and let them know what you're doing, and try to understand, you know, how you can do that in their jurisdiction, it really helps pave the way for those relationships that really can help out with the cost, right? There's some times when you can work with a jurisdiction where, you know, if you've got the great relationship, and they've got maybe like a paving project coming up, you know, maybe they're not going to make you pave the whole width of the lane, because maybe they're just going to come right in and pave it behind you. So having those relationships set up from the beginning can also bleed into helping out with other problems. So great discussion on that. So I think we are coming up to our first poll here. So, you know, if this is for the audience, what's your biggest challenge out there with permitting? Is it local permits, railroad permits, environmental permits, state permits, and federal permits? So I think you should see on your screen now the poll. Go ahead and answer that, and then we'll see what the panelists think about, you know, which one's the worst.
There should be an all of the above.
It could apply, that's for sure.
Interesting.
All right, it looks like we have some results, and we've kind of got a tie here. So it's coming in third place is local permits. And tied for first is railroad permits and environmental permits, which is not that much of a shock really, because they're typically the toughest or they take the longest, right? And so maybe you can start this one, Christina, and maybe those environmental permits. What do you how do you feel about those fun little?
I agree with Rob, all of the above. Because it all depends on where you're working, how you're working, what you're doing. Below grade, you're going to have a lot more permit issues than you would aerially. It all depends on what you're trying to do. And the benefit of permits is it may not just be one. So you may have local and environmental permits. You may have federal, state, and railroad permits. It could be myriad of permits that are required for any particular job. So again, we kind of come back to that. You have to do your homework. You have to have a full understanding of the area in which you're designing and you're working, making sure that, and Rob's done it too. In fact, Rob's done it with me in past life. At our previous, in the past 20 years, you pull up the DOT regs, whether or not they're the state, whether or not the municipality, you pull up the railroad regs, you pull everything up so that you have a full understanding of exactly what's going on in the world you're working in. That's the only challenge that, that's the only way that you can combat it is knowledge and making sure that you dot the I's and cross the T's.
And start early too. I mean, like once you have a design, you're going to need to cross the railroad, or you're going to have DOT permits. I mean, you know what the long lead times are. I mean, I would generally pull a group of people off to the side and have them focused exclusively on complex permitting and looking at the maps and saying, okay, it may not be exactly at this point, but I'm 100% certain I'm going to have to cross that railroad, and the railroad is going to be very, very complicated to work with. So get me a crossing. And even if I have to adjust my build or design to get to that crossing wherever they give it to me, you're probably better off doing that. So just really focusing on those hard to permit areas and doing it way sooner in the project. I mean, it's not that hard to drop a handle on either side of a complex crossing, put some conduit underneath there, and then voila, when you show up, it's there and ready for you.
Agreed. Yeah, and I told the audience here that we could talk about permitting all day, and we definitely could, but we're going to go ahead and move
we
on
didn't
to the
even
next.
get into right away.
We're going to move through, so we're at the half hour now. So problem 3, infrastructure. Obviously when we get into the construction phase, there's a lot of different challenges out there that, sort of as Rob mentioned in the beginning, that are gotchas, right? They can really derail things or make you change, sometimes your entire plan. Or they can just be really expensive, right? If you don't know that there's rock under the ground and you budgeted a certain amount for boring or trenching, and now you run into rock, it really derails things. So what are some of the ways that we can overcome those physical barriers and sort of keep the schedule of the project on track? So these are some of the solutions that the group came up with. So maybe Phil, you can kind of let us know how you handle challenges with infrastructure.
Well, yeah, I mean, during construction, it is those surprises. In the Bay Area, especially with streets that are full, the biggest challenge we run is we're boring down a street and you go to potholes. So you're thinking you're a week away from boring and someone else is there, right? That you didn't plan for at a depth you didn't plan for. And some of our municipalities require bore profiles. So it's a multi-step process just to give the rig a go. So the more research ahead of time, I know it's kind of a recurring theme we're all talking about. The more understanding we have of who's in the street, and how do we make sure we have a plan and or a way to quickly get updates, right? And that's kind of the biggest thing. If you think of a challenging permit process and all of a sudden your running line needs to shift 5 feet, left or right, do you have to go back and re-permit it, right? Do you have a 30-day lag, or can you actually, get some time on the counter and get it done? So having those relationships is really, kind of that key piece in our municipalities to get past the surprises that really have slowed things down. A lot of cities are starting to do the build once, so the open trench. So it does slow your project down if you're behind. However, it gives you an opportunity, if you're watching where the people are building, to get some conduit in the ground if you can have your project designed far enough ahead. So there's a few different things we work on in, kind of that urban area.
Thanks, Phil. Christina, you want to tell us about maybe some of the solutions that you've seen work in regards to dealing with difficult infrastructure, or, permitting traffic control, those kinds of things?
Sure. So I agree with Phil 100%. The ability to quickly revise a design, knowing what needs to be done is key, along with making sure that you understand any changes, how far you can go before you have to resubmit that permit. But there's a couple things. So understanding and knowing who the other utilities are, working with them in a collaborative effort, and making sure, to the point of a joint trench. If you know that they're opening up a trench, we know what the distances need to be between electric and telco in some, different areas. But if there's a trench open, do we have the ability to work with that other utility? Do we understand what the overall impacts would be to vehicular and pedestrian traffic? Are we making sure that we're taking that into consideration? Have we looked to see whether or not the jobs require a traffic control plan? What are all of the requirements? And then the other thing is, how are we building? So to Rob's point earlier, there's micro trenching, there's macro trenching, narrowband trenching, standard trenching, depending upon what it is that you need to do. Ensuring that you understand exactly what you need to do, how you're planning on doing, and understanding what the overall impact of that would be to the people that are living there, traveling there for work, even for the the folks that are actually deploying. Is it a safe area? You don't want to send someone out to do standard trenching, 3 by 5 by 3 foot trenching on a state highway, not during the day, and sometimes not even at night. So understanding what the overall environment is, where you're going to do it, how you're going to do it, and then making sure that you're working with partners. No one should, my recommendation has always been, you never do anything in a silo. There's no secrets. Everybody can see what you're doing. Everybody knows. It's best to partner up.
Thanks, Christina. And Rob, maybe you can sort of touch on the aerial aspect of infrastructure. And a lot of fiber to the home deployments these days, everybody wants to try to get on the poles. How do we achieve, getting a good aerial mix versus underground to help, that cost?
So, I mean, we have a little bit of a distinct advantage there. We're one of the largest power distribution and transmission companies in North America. So what I do, if I'm going to be in a municipality, I leverage this all the time. I go find my counterparts on the electric side, and I'm like, hey, get me in with your crew who you work with every day. And we go in there and we create a make-ready plan that would generally we can affect. I mean, even outside of like the OTMR space, oftentimes, even if it's not an OTMR state, we can actually go in and have some meetings and say, look, we already manage, from our company's perspective, we already manage your pole loading analysis and the majority of your aerial infrastructure work anyway with a different line of business. So would you be okay if we came in to this and kind of worked amongst ourselves, providing you with the information you need to keep track and just kind of rip through this? And it works well with the power company. Where it kind of falls apart is when you're building infrastructure in the comm space and competitions in there, mean, obviously, we all know there's not a great deal of incentive for them to go, move their facilities or prepare space for you. So there's not. I mean, this is certainly not a one size fits all. I put things in different categories, like what can you control, what can you influence, and what do you need to accept, and try to manage them accordingly.
I think that's a great take on it, because there definitely are lots of challenges, and not always the same solution is going to get results. All right, we're going to go on to problem number 4 now, which is rural and remote areas. As we're starting to see the digital divide, try to be closing in that gap. What we're seeing is, a lot of the folks that are underserved and unserved, there tends to be a reason for that, because it takes a lot to get fiber out to those areas. There's a lot of copper networks out there that are, not doing so well these days to provide the level of service that people expect. So how do we tackle that from a planning, design, and construction perspective on, getting out there to the edge of the network in these rural areas? Rob, why don't you start with this one?
Yeah, this is a fun one for me. I actually sit on the broadband development office as a board member for the state of Texas. So a lot of discussion about high cost areas, rural. I mean, the simple fact is, if your lot line, meaning like how many lots do you pass per foot of fiber, if it's beyond about 60, 65 foot, the build is no longer economical. I mean, we can do all the magical stuff we want, but that's just the way it works. So right off the bat, you have to presume some level of subsidization. The other thing I always want to separate, and we did a good job of this in Texas at least, is the two concepts of rural broadband and digital divide. Rural broadband is a problem that you have to solve because of that lot line premise. Instead of like a dense urban area where you're at 60 foot or below, you're at quarter mile plus per house that you got to build fiber. Digital divide, we put in the category more of, it's an area that capitalism simply did not drive an investment because we didn't believe the return would be sufficient. It may have nothing to do with the lot line. It's just that part of town that the analysis suggests you're not going to get a return on it. But so both of those have to be resolved. The solution for rural is not that complicated. Get on the ground and figure out where you have to go, drive the route. If there's a pole line, can you get on it? That's going to be a relatively quick yes or no. If there's not, work with the provider and convince them that in some cases, direct bury, plow, you got to use lower construction cost methods just to get it done and keep it economical. I mean, I love conduit for restoration just as much as anybody, but sometimes you just got to get fiber in the ground if you can't get it on a pole. And these plow rigs in rural areas can really, really crank out some substantial footage if that's an option. So that's what I would look at.
Thanks, Rob. Phil, I know this is a good one for you, because you don't have too many rural areas that.
Yeah, I'd say,
well,
our solution is, we don't do rural. But I think Rob is really right on the digital divide. And something we've done is we spun up a nonprofit to help the digital divide. So those socially economic areas in the Bay Area that it doesn't make sense to build infrastructure to, and so that we can work with the community, right, with the municipalities, and then with us and other partners. So it's not something, we have no economic reason to go build those areas, but we do see a need, and so that's why we kind of spun up this nonprofit to be a resource and to help bring people together to find a way to connect them. And that's how we look at it. Yeah, because it is a real challenge. I think, as Rob mentioned, there's, it's density, but it's not economical. And that's different than when your density isn't there. So.
Yeah, thank you. And then Christina, maybe you could talk just a little bit about how engineering trends have changed with designing rural builds versus high density areas. And what's done to sort of maybe speed up the process of engineering as opposed to having, guys just out there walking miles and miles.
Okay. So creating feasibility level designs, taking that view from a GIS application perspective, being able to measure out based upon the data that's there, where you're going to go, how much cable do you need, how many handholds are you going to have to place. Figuring out all of those things provides you with a very high level of, I don't want to call it accuracy because you still need to do, your design, but a feasibility level design does give you the quality to see where you're going to go, how much material you're going to need, and you can plot out from there as a customer perspective how long you think it's going to take. The other part too with a good feasibility level design is when you have that information, you can ascertain how much it's going to cost you per home or per foot, which will help for you to drive a decision on how you're going to prioritize a build, where you're going to go, and what time frame you're going to do that in. I think one of the things that's important that we have listed here is the incorporation of better ROI. It's not just ROI in the long game. It's actually TCO. It's the total cost of ownership. So as you're building out those networks, are you building it as a one and done, meaning you're simply going to, provide them with broadband service, or is there a thought process later on down the road that you want to monetize your network, meaning you want to provide dark fiber, you want to provide other pathways as a means to provide services to other things. So as you start to look at all of those aspects, it helps you to drive a better picture of not just how much is it going to cost you, because that does matter, but that's the immediate. But as you grow your network and what your intent is overall with your network, where you want to go in the future. Do you want to go back there in 2 years? Do you want to go back there in 5 years? So it all depends on what it is that you're trying to do, and having that level of communication, at least for Biarri, when we talk to a customer, understanding what their overall game plan and their goals are as they move forward, helps us to drive a much more detailed, very comprehensive picture for them.
Thank you. And just to maybe touch on a couple of these other points, for those folks that are out there building networks, you can offer for your customers to self-install their drops. Try looking at other technology solutions. If you're in an area with, it's flat and there's not a lot of trees, you can put up some wireless access points, and maybe you can make that connection to the home with fixed wireless, right? I mean, I think sometimes fixed wireless and fiber are pitted against each other in the industry a little bit too much. And everybody's like, oh, fiber's better, or fixed wireless is better. But in my opinion, today's networks need to include whatever it takes to get to the customer. And I think sometimes if it's a blended solution with fiber to a point and fixed wireless from there, as long as the geography and the terrain will still allow that good connection, I think there's some things that folks should be looking at on that end too, with the technology advancements that have been made in recent years with fixed wireless stuff. So we have our next poll here. So what do you see as the biggest challenge for rural builds? Number one would be lengthy, costly builds. Number two would be resources. Number three is construction in sensitive areas. These all would apply too, Rob.
Yeah, well, and if with Phil being the one that builds in the metro areas more so than most, I'll tell you, I'll build in a rural area all day over a metro area. I mean, you just got a group of people generally that are like, "Oh my God, thank you! You're bringing something to my house." Yeah.
That is the big advantage, right? If you're something new versus being something competitive, right? There's a difference.
Yeah, I know traffic control is a lot easier out there on those country roads too, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
I completely agree with the outcome of this poll. Definitely.
Yeah, so
Yep.
I don't think this is any surprise here. Lengthy, costly builds is, sitting there at 76%. And then second place would be construction in sensitive areas. And then resources would come in third at 12%. So, and obviously this is one of the reasons why, the government's getting more and more involved in subsidizing fiber to the home deployments through, they've done it for several decades with the RUS projects. We've seen ACAM and now BEAD is on the. So it seems like each administration wants to have their hand in this, and there's I think it's 45-46 billion dollars getting ready to come in the industry over the next however many years, once they can kind of figure out how to allocate these funds to the states and then down to the network operators. So it definitely makes sense that it is the most lengthy and costly build. And so with the government stepping in and providing these grants, hopefully that will offset enough to really get those builds going in those rural areas. So Christina, what are your thoughts on rural builds and BEAD at this point in time from an engineering perspective? Where do you see
So, yeah, there's quite a few things. So a lot of times with the BEAD, again, that's where you kind of start off with a feasibility level study. You understand exactly what's what. There's so much money that is slated to be sent out, and I'm going to apologize to everyone now because my cat is going to walk directly in front of my computer. So I'm sorry for that. But the one thing that's very, very important here is that understanding what those funds cover, when they're expected, and in the checks and balances that are in play for that. It's not an open checkbook. As we build into, the rural broadband build, we have to make sure that we consider all of the needs, right? So the needs of the telco or the altnet, the needs of the customer, and what the overall, impact is. The other part too is, and we haven't touched upon it on this call, is BABA, right? So Buy America, Buy American, and making sure that not only as you do your design, is it the best design to get from point A to point B, not just the deployment, making sure you have the right folks to do the job, but understanding too what the rules of engagement are relative to the components that you're physically using out in the field. So there's a lot that goes into all of that funding and making sure that we're all in alignment from planning to design to deployment to the actual turning up of a customer. It's all rolled in there together. And I'm sorry, I freely admit my cat completely threw me off. So
it's going to be an interesting next few years to see how BEAD is rolled out. So we'll have to stay tuned on that one. So we're up to our last problem. We've got a little over 10 minutes left, and I wanted to leave a few minutes for questions. So probably won't spend a whole ton of time on this one. But Phil, maybe you can kind of enlighten us on how you handle take rate, customer service, and keeping your customers from your competitors.
Well, yeah, and I think it's urban or rural, right? When you're launching and you're making noise on the street, and and you're new, you got to leverage that with getting the customers in, maintaining customers, that service, right? Both the people skills of who takes the calls, and more importantly, it's a network, right? And there's obviously we have a good benefit of, a Bay Area ring, 7 data centers, unlimited capacity out. So like low latency network wise, it's easy to manage that piece, the human skills, the, understanding who and what your customers want to talk to. And really we do a lot of comparing between how we handle calls versus how the competition handles calls, and understanding, after your initial launch, the best time you grab more customers is if someone's fed up with who they're using. And so understanding those touch points and understanding how we continue to have our team focused on how they're improving that engagement, being open internally to everyone's experiences, because everyone doesn't sit on our network. So when employees have challenges, we leverage that as opportunities for how we can improve our process.
Thank you. And I know it's as the landscape sort of develops and competition rises, I think those are all great points. And there's some other solutions here too. And again, this is probably we could talk about this for a while in regards to different fiber providers or internet providers that we've had over the years, and how great they were, how great they weren't in regards to customer service and just service in general. Take a look at these solutions as you guys are looking at your deployments and figuring out your customers. So we have some takeaways here, but I did want to, before we go there, I wanted to get to the question just to make sure we have enough time. So let me go here and if I can find the question. So the question for the panelists, it's kind of a long one here. This says, we are a fixed network provider in Tanzania. We started deploying point-to-point active Ethernet network for businesses more than 10 years ago. And recently we moved to deploy residential and small businesses. What are considerations to optimize cost with point-to-point active Ethernet network? And is it the right time to move to the passive optical PON? And an example is XGS PON, which, here in the United States, I think most projects are going that way. So, Christina, you want to take that one?
Sure. So I guess, using point to point, my understanding would be what you're probably trying to think of doing is placing an active component at these, customer prem. Is it time to move to passive? It possibly, sorry.
Love it.
Possibly, yes. So I'm a proponent of passive, and I'm going to tell you why. You use fiber, you split it, and you can get further with less glass. You can push it. Whether you're going to do centralized architecture, distributed architecture, to me, PON is the way to go if you're going to do residential. You can also move to a WDM model and move it forward from there, a distributed tap. I guess my question would be, if you're doing the business case study and not exactly knowing the distances in which you are going, that's going to make a difference too, because then you have your loss and you have to figure everything out. So it's an open-ended question. I mean, I'll defer to Phil and Rob, but without knowing, how large of an area, how far are you going, and what are you actually trying to push across it? Are you doing data? Are you doing video as well? What are you trying to push through on it?
Yeah, I've been doing this my whole. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Phil.
Well, I was gonna say, jumping on, I think, QUANTA and Paxio have, we've been through this entire process. So Paxio has been a dedicated, fiber provider. A project we worked on together, we had to roll in PON as well, but you had to keep fibers available for dedicated. So yeah, density matters. When you want to leverage existing infrastructure and you're not needing the same level of service as you do for an enterprise customer, you want a broadband solution, right? You need to, have some kind of multi-use or splitting of those fibers, because yes, in a distance, you don't want to run a new 864 down to serve a community of, 400 or 600 homes. You want to be able to take 12 or 24 fibers and serve all those homes. So yeah, it is if you're looking at going residential on top of an enterprise network, you're going to want to put PON either, some gear out in the field or somewhere back. And that's, I think Rob can probably add to that, because yeah, QUANTA has a lot of experience doing that as well. Kind of figuring out how you maximize your distribution. Yeah,
I mean, I don't even know what more I could add. The answer is yes. You go to PON. I mean, that's just as simple as that. I mean, what you're going to lose in fiber ring cut dead on point to point versus what you could leverage those fibers for by jumping from F1 to F2 and using WDM technology, even passive with a splitter. I mean, it's just there's no comparison. As a matter of fact, what we often do is, kind of Phil alluded to it, a network was built by a CLEC, let's say in the 90s, and they've got a series of rings, and what we have to do then is figure out how to basically transition that into a distribution network that looks more like a fiber, like a fiber to the home. And that's the first step, is trying to leverage the existing infrastructure to very quickly convert it to passive. There's just not a more efficient way to deliver fiber to multi-residents. Christina and Phillip both said the same thing, though. Being from an engineering background, I certainly want to see the density and what we're actually trying to achieve. But I'd be hard pressed to say that moving to PON is a bad idea, no matter what.
Very good answers there. I hope that answered your question. And this last slide that's here, overall, obviously, these 5 problems are not the only 5 problems that we discussed today. There's a whole bag of them out there. Technology's changing, the rules are changing, supply chain's always changing, cost is always changing. And I think, from my perspective, what I've seen over the course of my career and where things are today is that with technology advancing in field collection data, design, and construction methods and tools and equipment and knowledge centers of training, I believe that the industry is set well for where we're coming into next with the large fiber to the home projects, really across the globe. But it's going to take a collaborative approach. It's going to take competitors partnering with each other. It's going to take a lot of collaboration between network operators and their suppliers and vendors. And so I just wanted to throw those statements out there. I wanted to give the panelists sort of one last chance to talk. Really appreciate you guys joining today. This has been very engaging, and I think for our audience, some very important topics, and sort of how we've handled that stuff over the years and are handling it now. So, Rob, do you want to go ahead and give us a parting statement?
Yeah, I mean, so I've lived the majority of my life on the operator owner side and have transitioned into the GC construction engineering side. I'll tell you that's about as fun as it gets. I mean, I love building stuff, so that part is a given. But to be able to sit with somebody and understand exactly what they're trying to achieve and what obstacles they're trying to prepare for, like what I try to do, and I would encourage everybody, like, lay it all out on the table. But don't let yourself go in. Don't let a contractor and don't let yourself believe it's going to be easier than it is. Find the nuances of restoration requirements and all of the things that are going to make it more complicated, and put together a realistic build plan, timelines included, and you're going to have a better experience. And I don't focus on the 7 to 10 year ROI, blah, blah, blah. If you build a fiber network in a market that's desperate for fiber network, you're going to make money. So just don't try to suffer from analysis paralysis. Just build the shit. It's somebody's going to buy it.
That's my slides. Thanks for that, Rob. And I agree. I think, those are some great points, and, having such a storied career and somebody that likes, as you say, to build things, there sure are a lot of challenges in getting there. We did have one more question. This is not working for me, so let's see here. We did have one more question, and it's actually specifically to Biarri, Christina. So if you wanted to take this one, it's how does Biarri ensure proper field data collection?
So I'm glad that you asked. So we have actually recently turned up our field and engineering services. And you can actually find more information about that on the biarri.networks.com website. So basically what it is making sure that we have spoken with the customer, we understand what their needs are. We do that via what we call establishment. identifying what they need, where they need it, and how they need it, whether that's field survey, whether it's poll data collection, whether it's address validation, MRE, permitting, traffic control plans. So how we ensure is that we have excellent partners. We also have, we're working through some in-house capabilities. So do you have any questions? I know that it is exactly 2 o'clock, so I don't want to hold up Phil from being able to have his closing moment. So if you have any questions, please, by all means, feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to talk one-on-one.
Thanks, Christina. Okay, you're up next, Phil.
All right, thanks. First, thanks, Scott, Christina, Rob. It was great to talk before this and through this panel. I'd say actually similar to Rob. I mean, I love building stuff. I've been a bit guy, for all these years, and always focus on how do you get better connectivity to more places. And fiber, it's great to see that it's really come a long way since the first challenges back in 2001, trying to just get vendors to give you gear that you can do to the home. So yeah, and the person who asked the question, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to walk you through all the different things that we've done in looking at enterprise to residential and those combinations. So happy to help and really appreciate y'all listening. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Phil. Again, thank you, panelists. Our contact information is up here. We've all been in the industry for quite a while in different roles and aspects of it. So feel free to please reach out to any of us or all of us with any of your questions or comments. And we really hope that you enjoyed this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.